Helen Golay. In Los Angeles, Helen Golay and her accomplice Olga Rutterschmidt orchestrated one of the most calculated and chilling murder-for-profit schemes in recent memory. Both elderly women, once seen as wealthy socialites, secretly preyed on the city's most vulnerable homeless men, luring them in with offers of food, shelter, and security. Behind their benevolent facade, they forged signatures and submitted dozens of life insurance applications, quietly making themselves the sole beneficiaries. In 1999, their first victim was 73-year-old Paul Vados, a Hungarian immigrant who had fallen on hard times. His body was discovered in a Hollywood alley, and at the time, police ruled the case a hit-and-run accident. But what looked like a random tragedy was part of a deadly plan. Within months, Golay and Rutterschmidt collected nearly $600,000 from multiple insurance policies they had taken out in his name. Greed pushed them further. In 2005, they befriended 50-year-old Kenneth McDavid, another homeless man. After securing more than a dozen insurance policies worth nearly $3 million, McDavid was found dead in a West Los Angeles alley, run over in a staged hit-and-run that mirrored the Vados case. This time, detectives noticed disturbing similarities. A pattern emerged: two vulnerable men, both struck down under identical circumstances, both linked to the same elderly women cashing in on multi-million-dollar payouts. By 2006, the investigation closed in, and detectives uncovered the paper trail of insurance fraud, forged signatures, and suspiciously overlapping beneficiaries. Helen Golay was arrested at her Santa Monica home, while Rutterschmidt was taken into custody in Hollywood. Prosecutors dubbed them the Black Widows of Los Angeles, presenting the jury with a story of calculated greed masked as charity. On April 18, 2008, after a 6-week trial, both women were convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. On July 15, 2008, Helen Golay and Olga Rutterschmidt were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge condemned them for exploiting the most defenseless members of society, declaring that their crimes revealed a cold and remorseless pursuit of money. Brenda Spencer. On the morning of January 29, 1979, 16-year-old Brenda Spencer carried out a deadly attack from her home in San Diego, California, directly across the street from Grover Cleveland Elementary School. Armed with a semi-automatic .22 caliber Ruger rifle her father had given her for Christmas in 1978, she fired into the schoolyard as children waited for classes to begin. Principal Burton Ragg was shot and killed while trying to help students reach safety, and custodian Mike Suchar was also killed as he attempted to protect the children. 8 children and a responding police officer were wounded in the gunfire. When asked later about her motive, Spencer gave a chilling reply to a reporter, saying she doesn't like Mondays and that this livens up the day, referring to what just happened. The comment shocked the nation and became permanently associated with the case. After a tense standoff with police that lasted several hours, Spencer surrendered and was taken into custody. She was prosecuted as an adult and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and assault with a deadly weapon. On April 4, 1980, one day after her 18th birthday, she was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. She has remained incarcerated ever since, with repeated parole hearings resulting in denial. As of 2025, Brenda Spencer is still serving her sentence at the California Institution for Women in Chino. Brittany May Lyon. They say the worst monsters hide in plain sight, and in San Diego, California, a babysitter named Brittany May Lyon offered child care, often advertising her ability to care for children with special needs, including those with autism and children who were nonverbal, and she was trusted by many parents. But behind that image, she was hiding unimaginable crimes. In 2016, the first cracks appeared when a 7-year-old girl told her mother she no longer wanted to be with Lyon. When pressed, she revealed that Lyon had been sexually abusing her and had also allowed her boyfriend Samuel Cabrera to abuse her as well. That disclosure set off an investigation that uncovered something unimaginable. Police eventually searched Cabrera's vehicle and discovered a double-locked box with 6 hard drives inside, filled with hundreds of disturbing videos. The recordings showed Lyon and Cabrera sexually abusing multiple young girls, some as young as 3 years old, including children with developmental disabilities. The abuse involved drugging, coercion, and deliberate cruelty, all filmed from different angles to document their actions. Lyon's crimes went beyond passive complicity. Investigators found messages showing she had actively facilitated abuse, at times bartering access to children for dates with Cabrera. She not only arranged opportunities for him, but also directly participated in assaults herself. Cabrera had already faced justice years earlier. In 2019, a jury convicted him, and in 2021 he was sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. But Lyon's fate would take longer to be decided. In May 2025, Lyon pleaded guilty to multiple felonies, including 2 counts of lewd acts upon a child and 2 counts of forcible lewd acts upon a child. She also admitted to aggravating allegations involving kidnapping, burglary, and sexual assault of several victims. On August 14, 2025, the court sentenced her to 100 years to life in prison. Catherine Kieu. In July 2011, Garden Grove police were called to an apartment after a man awoke in agony and told them his wife had drugged his food and attacked him in his sleep. The attacker was identified as 48-year-old Catherine Kieu, also known as Catherine Kieu Becker. Investigators later testified that she had laced her husband's dinner with sleeping pills, tied him to the bed after he passed out, and then used a kitchen knife to sever his penis. She carried the mutilation further by throwing the organ into a garbage disposal and switching it on, making the injury irreversible. Her husband, then 60 years old, was rushed to UC Irvine Medical Center, where surgeons tried to repair the damage, but doctors said the maiming was permanent. Kieu was arrested at the scene and booked on charges of torture and aggravated mayhem, some of the most serious violent felonies under California law. At her first appearance in July 2011, she was ordered held on $1 million bail. During the trial in Orange County Superior Court in 2013, prosecutors argued that Kieu acted out of vengeance because her husband had filed for divorce and planned to move on with his life. They presented evidence that she had premeditated the crime, pointing to the drugging, the restraints, and the disposal of the organ. Her defense attorneys claimed she had suffered years of abuse, but the jury rejected that argument. On June 28, 2013, the jury convicted Catherine Kieu of torture and aggravated mayhem. Judge Richard Toohey sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Melissa Huckabee. In March 2009, 8-year-old Sandra Cantu disappeared from her neighborhood in Tracy, California, after being seen on security footage skipping down the street near her home. 10 days later, her body was discovered stuffed inside a black suitcase that had been submerged in an irrigation pond. Investigators traced the suitcase back to Melissa Huckabee, a 28-year-old Sunday school teacher and neighbor whose daughter often played with Sandra. Police determined that Huckabee lured Sandra into her home, drugged her with alprazolam, sexually assaulted her, and strangled her with a noose before placing her body inside the suitcase. In a disturbing twist, Huckabee had previously reported that very suitcase as stolen in what appeared to be an attempt to mislead investigators. Huckabee was arrested on April 10, 2009, and charged with kidnapping, rape, and murder. Prosecutors initially considered seeking the death penalty, citing the calculated and cruel nature of the crime. However, in May 2010, Huckabee pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and kidnapping in exchange for the dismissal of additional charges, including sexual assault. On June 14, 2010, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Nancy Garita. In June 1991, 11-year-old Jaycee Dugard was walking to her school bus stop in Myers, California, when she was suddenly approached by Philip and Nancy Garrido. Philip used a stun gun to incapacitate her, and Nancy helped force the child into their car. The couple then drove Jaycee to their home in Antioch, California, where they kept her hidden in a makeshift backyard compound that included sheds and a soundproofed structure. For the next 18 years, Jaycee lived in captivity. During that time, she was repeatedly assaulted by Philip Garrido, and she gave birth to 2 daughters while confined in the compound. Nancy was not merely a witness to these crimes. She actively participated by helping to keep Jaycee under control and concealed from the outside world. The truth finally came to light in August 2009, when Philip Garrido's suspicious behavior on the UC Berkeley campus drew the attention of campus security officers. Their alert to parole authorities led to questioning of the couple, which exposed Jaycee's identity and the years of abuse she had endured. On April 28, 2011, Nancy Garrido pleaded guilty to kidnapping and to charges related to sexual assault, and on June 2, 2011, she was sentenced to 36 years to life in prison. Philip Garrido received a sentence of 431 years to life in prison. Omaima Nelson. On Thanksgiving weekend in 1991, police in Costa Mesa discovered one of the most gruesome murders in Orange County history. 23-year-old Omaima Nelson, an Egyptian immigrant, had married 56-year-old William Bill Nelson just weeks earlier. Their whirlwind marriage quickly turned volatile, and in late November it ended in shocking violence. Authorities later testified that Omaima killed her husband inside their apartment, then mutilated his body. Investigators found Bill's remains dismembered, with some parts wrapped in newspaper, others stuffed in garbage bags, and some others placed inside the garbage disposal. Prosecutors alleged that she not only dismembered him, but also cooked and ate portions of his flesh. When she was arrested, Omaima initially told police she had acted in self-defense after enduring abuse. But prosecutors argued the killing was intentional, fueled by greed and control. The crime scene and her own statements convinced investigators that the murder went far beyond self-preservation. In January 1993, a jury convicted Omaima Nelson of second-degree murder, and 2 months later, on March 18, 1993, a judge sentenced her to 27 years to life in prison. Giselle Esteban. In May 2011, Michelle Lay, a 26-year-old nursing student at Samuel Merritt University, disappeared after leaving her clinical rotation at Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in Hayward, California. Surveillance cameras recorded her walking to her car in the hospital parking garage, but she was never seen alive again. Investigators quickly turned their attention to Giselle Esteban, a former high school friend of Michelle's. Esteban had become obsessed and jealous, believing, without evidence, that Michelle was involved with her ex-boyfriend and the father of her child. Police uncovered that Esteban had threatened Michelle in text messages and social media posts, followed her movements, and searched the internet for ways to take revenge. On the night Michelle vanished, Esteban's cell phone records placed her near the hospital parking structure. Forensic evidence later revealed Michelle's blood inside her locked car. Months later, in September 2011, a hiker found skeletal remains in a remote canyon near Sunnull, California, which DNA testing confirmed they belonged to Michelle Lay. Esteban was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. On October 29, 2012, a jury found her guilty of first-degree murder, and 2 months later, on December 10, she was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Brittany Fernandez. In Palmdale, California, the brutal murder of 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez shocked the nation. On May 22, 2013, paramedics were called to an apartment where they found Gabriel unresponsive and his body covered in injuries. He had fractured ribs, skull trauma, and pellets from a BB gun lodged in his skin. After 2 days on life support, he was declared brain dead on May 24th. Investigators later learned he had endured months of abuse, including being beaten with belts and a bat, locked in a cabinet, gagged, forced to eat spoiled food, and sprayed with pepper spray. His mother, Brittany Fernandez, had a long history of neglect and violent behavior, compounded by drug use and gang ties. Multiple warnings had been raised by teachers, relatives, and social workers, but the system failed to act in time. Together with her boyfriend, Isora Aguirre, she was arrested in May 2013 and charged in Gabriel's death. In February 2018, Brittany Fernandez pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and admitted the special circumstance of intentional murder by torture. On June 7, Los Angeles County Superior Court Judge George G. Lomelli sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her boyfriend, Aguirre, was tried separately, convicted of first-degree murder with the torture special circumstance and sentenced to death. Gabriel Fernandez remains incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, serving a life term with no chance of release. Kathy Lynn Sarinana. In December 2005, Riverside County authorities uncovered one of the most shocking child murder cases in California history. 11-year-old Ricky Morales and his older brother, 10-year-old Conrad, were staying with their aunt, Kathy Lynn Sarinana, and her husband Raul in Corona. What should have been a holiday visit quickly became a nightmare. The boys were beaten with belts, choked with electrical cords, and subjected to days of abuse. On Christmas Day, both children were killed. Ricky was strangled, while Conrad was suffocated, and their small bodies were stuffed into plastic containers and hidden inside a storage shed at the Sarinana's home. When the boys' disappearance was reported, police launched a frantic search, and within days, investigators made the grisly discovery. The community was stunned that trusted relatives could commit such cruelty. Kathy and Raul tried to flee, escaping across the border into Mexico, but they were captured in Mexicali just 2 days after the murders, arrested by Mexican authorities, and quickly extradited back to California to face charges. The case moved to Riverside County Superior Court, where evidence of torture and prolonged abuse left jurors horrified. Kathy and Raul Sarinana each faced 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. In April 2009, after separate juries weighed the evidence, both were recommended for the death penalty, and on June 26, 2009, the judge formally sentenced Kathy Lynn Sarinana to death. Kristin Rossum. In San Diego, a toxicologist named Kristin Rossum was convicted in 2002 of using her professional access to fentanyl to murder her husband Gregory DeVillers. On November 6, 2000, Rossum reported finding her 26-year-old husband unresponsive in their La Jolla apartment. Investigators were struck by the strange scene. His body was covered in scattered rose petals, imagery prosecutors later compared to the film American Beauty. Toxicology tests revealed Gregory had lethal amounts of fentanyl in his system, a synthetic opioid that Rossum had access to through her job at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office. Prosecutors argued she stole the drug from work and used it to poison him, staging the rose petal display as a cover. The motive, they said, was rooted in Rossum's double life. She had relapsed into methamphetamine abuse and was involved in an affair with her married supervisor, Dr. Michael Robertson. Gregory had threatened to expose her drug use and affair unless she went into treatment, leaving her desperate to silence him. At trial, Rossum's defense claimed Gregory took his own life, pointing to her history of drug use and marital conflict as circumstantial evidence, but jurors were convinced by the prosecution's narrative, and they found her guilty of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of murder by poison on November 12, 2002. Exactly 1 month later, on December 12, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Susan Eubanks. In San Marcos, California, on October 26, 1997, Susan Eubanks carried out one of the most shocking crimes in San Diego County history. Angry and intoxicated after an argument with her boyfriend, she armed herself with a .38 caliber revolver and deliberately shot her 4 young sons inside their family home. The victims were identified as 14-year-old Brandon, 7-year-old Austin, 6-year-old Brigham, and 4-year-old Matthew. Each child was killed execution style, and afterward Eubanks shot herself in the stomach in an apparent suicide attempt but survived. Deputies who entered the home found the boys dead and their mother wounded nearby. Prosecutors later revealed that Eubanks had written a note beforehand expressing anger toward her estranged husband and her boyfriend, framing the murders as an act of revenge. She was arrested that night and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances for multiple killings and firearm use enhancements. The trial in San Diego Superior Court unfolded over 2 years. On August 19, 1999, a jury found Susan Eubanks guilty on all charges. On October 13, 1999, the jury recommended the death penalty, and the judge imposed the sentence, placing her among the few women on California's death row at Chowchilla. For decades, Eubanks remained on death row, but in October 2024, after nearly 25 years, her sentence was overturned. A San Diego judge resentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, citing legal developments in capital punishment cases. She now continues to serve her time at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Monica Sementilli. In January 2017, Fabio Sementilli, a 49-year-old hairdresser and executive with Wella, was found stabbed to death at his home in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles. His body bore more than 20 wounds to his face, neck, chest, thigh, and jaw. At first, the scene appeared to be a violent robbery. His Porsche was missing, and his body was discovered outside on the patio. But investigators quickly uncovered that the truth was far more sinister. Detectives learned that Fabio's wife, Monica Sementilli, had been carrying on a secret affair with her lover, Robert Baker. Together, they devised a plot to murder Fabio and claim his $1.6 million life insurance policy. The crime was carefully staged to look like a break-in, but prosecutors later revealed that Monica and Baker had conspired for months before the killing. The evidence against Monica was overwhelming. Phone records, communications, and the brutality of the attack tied her directly to the conspiracy. On April 11, 2025, a Los Angeles County jury found her guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances, including financial gain and lying in wait. On June 24, 2025, Monica Sementilli was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Heather Maxine Barron. In June 2018, Lancaster paramedics rushed to the home of Heather Maxine Barron after she called 911 claiming her son, 10-year-old Anthony Avalos, had fallen. When first responders arrived, they found the boy unresponsive, covered in bruises, abrasions, and showing injuries, both old and new. He was taken to the hospital, but on June 21, 2018, Anthony was pronounced dead. Investigators quickly determined the boy had been tortured, and prosecutors later revealed that Anthony was starved, beaten, and forced to kneel for hours on grains of rice. He had also been whipped with belts, burned, and struck with electrical cords. These findings contradicted Heather Barron's story and revealed a long pattern of severe abuse inside her Lancaster apartment. Heather Barron and her boyfriend, Kareem Leyva, were arrested and charged with first-degree murder, torture, and child abuse. In March 2023, Los Angeles County Superior Court Judge Sam Ota found both Barron and Leyva guilty, and on April 25, he formally sentenced Heather Maxine Barron to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The same sentence was given to Kareem Leyva. Maria del Rosio Alfaro. Under the summer heat of June 15, 1990, tragedy struck in Anaheim, California. 9-year-old Autumn Wallace was home alone when she opened the door to Maria del Rosio Rosie Alfaro, an 18-year-old acquaintance of her older sister. Alfaro had gone to the Wallace residence intending to steal items she could sell for drug money, and what happened inside became one of Orange County's most disturbing crimes. Autumn was attacked in her own bathroom and stabbed 57 times with a kitchen knife. Prosecutors later described the killing as brutal, senseless, and committed against a defenseless child. Investigators quickly focused on Alfaro as fingerprints, shoe prints, and her own confession tied her directly to the murder. She admitted she was high on heroin and cocaine and desperate for money when she entered the Wallace home. Her arrest came within days, shocking the Anaheim community with the violent details of the crime. He was charged with first-degree murder with the special circumstances of burglary and robbery and found guilty of all counts. On July 14, 1992, Alfaro was sentenced to death, making her the first woman in Orange County ever sent to California's death row. Michelle Lynn Michaud. In the late 1990s, Michelle Lynn Michaud and her partner James DeVeggio became known as some of the most dangerous sexual predators in California. Both were described by prosecutors as manipulative and violent, with a history of abusive behavior. Together, they modified a minivan into what police later called a rolling torture chamber, installing ropes and devices to restrain victims. Their crimes escalated quickly, leading to one of the most brutal murders in Pleasanton's history. On December 2, 1997, 19-year-old Vanessa Leigh Sampson, a student from Pleasanton, was abducted as she walked down the street. Michaud and DeVeggio forced her into their van, where she was repeatedly raped and tortured using curling irons and other objects. The attack lasted for hours as they drove her across state lines, and eventually Sampson was strangled to death and her body was left in Nevada near Carson City. Police soon tracked down the pair in Reno. Inside their van, investigators found DNA, videotapes, and equipment that proved the kidnapping and sexual assaults had been carefully planned. The disturbing evidence linked Michaud and DeVeggio not only to Sampson's killing but also to other sexual assaults. Their trial revealed the full extent of their crimes. Jurors were shown evidence of the van's design and heard testimony describing the calculated nature of the attack. In May 2002, both were convicted of kidnapping, sexual assault, and first-degree murder with special circumstances, and in September 2002, the jury imposed the death penalty. The California Supreme Court upheld their convictions and sentences in 2018, noting the overwhelming evidence of guilt and the sadistic cruelty of the crimes. Today, Michelle Lynn Michaud remains on death row, one of the most notorious women in California's prison system. Cynthia Coffman. In 1986, Cynthia Coffman and her boyfriend, James Marlowe, began a string of brutal crimes across California that shocked the state. Coffman, who had grown up in a troubled home and endured abuse, met Marlowe after his release from prison. Their relationship quickly turned into a violent partnership, one that would leave several young women dead. That summer, the pair targeted women seemingly at random. 19-year-old Corinna Novus was abducted from a Redlands shopping center and strangled to death. Just weeks later, 20-year-old Linnell Murray, a Huntington Beach college student who worked part-time at a dry cleaner's, disappeared after finishing a shift. Her body was discovered, showing clear signs of restraint and strangulation. Around the same time, 20-year-old Sandra Neary vanished from a Riverside Mall parking lot. She, too, was later found murdered. Each killing bore the hallmarks of Coffman and Marlowe's spree of abduction, sexual assault, and calculated violence. Investigators connected the crimes as evidence surfaced. Witness accounts and forensic findings placed the couple at the scenes. In November 1986, police in Arizona arrested both Coffman and Marlowe, and under questioning, details emerged showing Coffman's direct involvement. She had lured women, participated in restraining them, and played an active role in the murders. Prosecutors rejected her claims that she acted only out of fear of Marlowe, arguing that she was not a passive victim but a willing participant in the crimes. In August 1989, a California jury convicted Coffman and Marlowe of multiple murders, and both were sentenced to death. Maureen McDermott. In 1985, the city of Northridge, California, became the site of a brutal and calculated killing that shocked the state, and Maureen "Mickey" McDermott, a 41-year-old nurse, was at the center of it all. Behind her ordinary appearance, she harbored a deadly plan against her 27-year-old roommate and fellow hospital worker Stephen Eldridge. On the night of the attack, Eldridge was stabbed more than 30 times in his own bedroom. The violence of the crime initially led detectives to suspect a personal vendetta, but the investigation quickly revealed something darker. McDermott had recruited a man named Billy Joe McKinney, promising him money and even a share in her home if he killed Eldridge. Her motive was simple but chilling. She feared Eldridge would take away her house, and instead of resolving it in court, she plotted his murder. The courtroom testimony opened up McDermott's cold calculations. Witnesses and evidence tied her directly to the plan, with McKinney himself admitting his role and pointing to her as the instigator. Prosecutors argued that McDermott manipulated those around her, orchestrating every detail of the killing. In June 1990, after a lengthy trial, the jury found Maureen McDermott guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances. She was sentenced to death, becoming the first woman in Los Angeles County in more than 2 decades to receive that penalty. Tanya Nelson. In April 2005, Garden Grove police discovered a fortune teller, Ha Jade Smith, and her 23-year-old daughter Anita Vo dead in their home with multiple stabs. The evidence quickly suggested the killings were not random, but instead motivated by betrayal and greed. Investigators soon identified Tanya Nelson, a woman from North Carolina who had once sought Smith's services as a fortune teller. Nelson believed Smith had given her false advice that damaged her personal life, and she became consumed by anger. Alongside her accomplice, Phung Tu Nguyen, Nelson drove across the country to confront Smith, and the confrontation ended with both women savagely murdering Smith and her daughter before ransacking the house for valuables. The brutality of the crime and the connection between Nelson and the victims gave detectives a direct path to their suspect. Witness testimony and physical evidence tied her to the killings, and in June 2005 authorities arrested Nelson, charging her with murder, burglary, and conspiracy. During the trial in Orange County, prosecutors described how Nelson meticulously planned the murders out of revenge and greed. The jury found her guilty of the double homicide in February 2010, and 2 months later, on April 23, the judge sentenced Tanya Nelson to death. Sheree Lash Rhoades. On February 20, 2014, a routine tribal council meeting in Alturas, California, turned into a deadly massacre. The session, held inside the Cedarville Rancheria tribal office, was meant to address the eviction of former tribal chairwoman Sheree Lash Rhoades. Instead, Rhoades pulled out a handgun and opened fire on her own relatives and community leaders. Within moments, 4 people were killed: her brother Rurik Davis, the tribal administrator, her niece Angel Penn, her nephew Glenn Kalinakako, and council chairwoman Sheila Russo. 2 others were left critically wounded, and when she ran out of bullets, she grabbed a butcher knife and tried to stab survivors before being overpowered and arrested at the scene. Reports at the time described the tribal office as a slaughterhouse, with witnesses recalling the terror of watching family members executed in front of them. Investigators later revealed that Rhoades had been under federal investigation for alleged misuse of tribal funds and had lost her leadership role. The eviction hearing that day symbolized the collapse of her power, and the dispute spiraled into an eruption of violence. Rhoades was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder, and in December 2016, a Modoc County jury found her guilty on all counts. In April 2017, the court formally sentenced Sheree Lash Rhoades to death, making her one of the rare women on California's death row. Janine Marie Snyder. In April 2001, the body of 16-year-old Michelle Curran of Las Vegas was discovered in a horse trailer in Riverside County, California. Investigators determined she had been kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. The suspects were identified as Michael Forrest Thornton, who was 45 years old, and Janine Marie Snyder, 21 years old, both from Rialto, California. According to court records and news reports, Michelle had last been seen walking to school before she disappeared. Thornton and Snyder lured her away, then subjected her to repeated abuse and torture while holding her captive. When the case broke open, prosecutors alleged that Snyder and Thornton not only kidnapped Michelle but also committed acts of sexual assault and inflicted extreme cruelty before killing her. Her body bore the signs of that torment. In March 2006, after years of legal proceedings, a Riverside County jury found both Thornton and Snyder guilty of first-degree murder. They were also convicted of kidnapping, torture, attempted sodomy, and related special circumstance allegations. The jury recommended death for both defendants, and in September 2006, Judge Paul Zellerbach imposed the death penalty on Janine Marie Snyder, affirming the jury's recommendation. Manling Sang Williams. On August 7, 2007, in the quiet suburb of Rowland Heights, California, 30-year-old Manling Sang Williams committed a crime so brutal that it horrified the entire community. That night, while her children were asleep, she pressed pillows over their faces and smothered them. Devon, who was just 7 years old, and Ian, only 3 years old, never woke up again. When her husband Neil Williams returned home, she ambushed him with a samurai sword, slashing him more than 90 times, leaving his body mutilated beyond recognition. Investigators later revealed that Manling had staged the scene to look like a break-in, but her story quickly unraveled as blood evidence, the weapon, and her inconsistent statements exposed the truth. Prosecutors argued that she killed because she wanted to escape her marriage and pursue another relationship, describing her actions as cold, deliberate, and merciless. In November 2010, after weeks of testimony, a jury convicted her of 3 counts of first-degree murder, and in 2012, Los Angeles County Superior Court Judge Robert J. Perry sentenced Manling Sang Williams to death. If you enjoyed this and want to see more interesting videos, I'm going to be posting every day on this channel. I would really appreciate it if you like and subscribe. Thank you very much.